Look at this machine. 2 tall wooden wheels, a hand-forged iron frame, a little coal furnace slung in the middle, and a saddle that is really a water tank. It does not look like a motorcycle. It looks like something a blacksmith built after reading too much Jules Verne. But it is a motorcycle. It is, by most honest measures, the first one ever made. A self-propelled 2-wheeler that a grown man sat on and rode down a public road under its own power. And it ran on steam and coal. Today it sits behind glass in the Smithsonian, in Washington, catalogued as the oldest self-propelled road vehicle in the entire national collection. It was built in Boston sometime between 1867 and 1869, which makes it roughly 18 years older than the machine that every history book, every museum plaque, every trivia question calls the first motorcycle. Everyone knows the one they mean. 1885, Germany, gasoline. A wooden contraption called the Reitwagen, built by Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach, celebrated for more than a century as the birth of the motorcycle. That is the story everyone knows. That machine was not the first motorcycle. It was not even close. The first one ran on steam. It was built by an American gunsmith. And here is the part the history books leave out entirely. That same gunsmith would climb onto a later version of it, ride it faster than any horse alive, and die in the saddle in front of a crowd, which makes him, quite possibly, the first human being ever killed on a motorcycle. His name was Sylvester Roper, and history erased him with a single word. Every week on this channel, we tell the stories of the machines and the people who built them, the ones history nearly forgot. If these machines deserve to be remembered, subscribe and hit like. And stay with this one, because a Boston gunsmith built the first motorcycle before gasoline was even a usable fuel, and it killed him on a bicycle track. This is the story of how the first motorcycle was written out of its own history. To see how a machine this important got buried, start with the word itself, motorcycle. Open the Oxford English Dictionary, and its entry defines a motorcycle as a 2-wheeled vehicle driven by an internal combustion engine. Read that definition slowly and notice what it actually does. It does not describe Roper's machine. It excludes it. By that wording, a 2-wheeler that runs on steam is not a motorcycle at all, no matter how fast it goes or how far it came first. The word was written to fit the winner. And gasoline did win, completely. Every mass-produced motorcycle that ever followed, from the first Indian and the first Harley to the last carbon superbike, traces its engine back to the internal combustion line that Daimler was working on, and not to the steam line that Roper was working on. Kevin Cameron, one of the finest technical writers the sport has ever produced, put the whole problem in one sentence. History, he said, follows the things that succeed, not the things that fail. Steam in motorcycles failed. So the history books simply followed gasoline backward to Daimler, stopped there, at 1885 drew a line, and called it the beginning, which is tidy, and convenient, and wrong. Because 18 years before that German test bed ever turned a wheel, a man in Boston had already built the thing, ridden the thing, and toured the country charging people to watch it run. Sylvester Howard Roper was born in Francistown, New Hampshire, in 1823. He was not a dreamer with a workshop. He was a working machinist, the kind of man who could look at a mechanism, take it apart in his head, and build a better one with his hands. Before he ever touched a bicycle, he had invented a hand-stitched sewing machine, designed hot air engines, more than 200 of them running by the late 1860s, and built a full steam carriage, a road automobile, back in 1863, decades before the car is supposed to exist either. He held patents on firearms, including a repeating shotgun he developed with Christopher Spencer, the man behind the Spencer repeating rifle. He patented lathes and fire escapes and furnaces. Roper knew boilers, he knew pressure, and he knew better than almost anyone alive how to make metal move. So when the bicycle craze reached America, the Bone Shaker, that brutal wooden velocipede with iron tires that rattled a rider's teeth loose, Roper did not see a toy. He saw a chassis. Sometime between 1867 and 1869, in his shop in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, he took a velocipede frame and hung an engine on it. Not a gasoline engine. There was no such thing yet. Not in any usable form on Earth. He built a small twin-cylinder steam engine, mounted a charcoal-fired boiler between the two wheels, and ran the pistons straight to cranks on the rear wheel. The saddle was the water tank. A hand pump fed the boiler. A little chimney vented the smoke out the back. The wheels stood 34 inches tall, and the whole strange thing balanced on a wheelbase barely longer than 4 feet. And here is the detail that should end the argument all by itself. To control it, Roper built a twist grip. The rider turned the handlebar grip one way to open the steam and go, and the other way to drag a brake against the front wheel. A twist grip throttle on a motorcycle in the 1860s. That is not a rough ancestor of the motorcycle. That is the motorcycle, the exact control a rider's right hand still uses today, invented by a man working nearly 20 years before the machine that gets the credit. And it worked. It genuinely worked. It could climb hills. It could, by Roper's own boast, outrun any horse on the road. And because a two-wheeler that runs on fire and beats horses is not something to keep in a shed, Roper put it on tour. The Hanlon brothers, a troupe of acrobatic circus performers, ran his steam velocipede as a headline attraction, taking it through fairs and circuses across New England at the end of the 1860s. There is a surviving handbill for it, printed in enormous block letters, advertising the greatest mechanical exhibition in the world. It was a steam motorcycle, it was a paid sideshow, and thousands of ordinary Americans stood in the dirt and paid their coins to watch it run under its own power, years before anyone in Germany turned a key. Think about that for a moment. While the engineers of Europe were still arguing about whether a self-powered road machine was even possible, working people in New England were buying tickets to watch one race around a fairground. And Roper was not even alone in the idea. At almost exactly the same time, on the other side of the Atlantic, a French engineer named Louis-Guillaume-Perreaux bolted a small steam engine onto a Michaux bicycle frame and built essentially the same machine, the one we now call the Michaux-Perreaux steam velocipede. Perreaux patented his in 1869. Roper never patented his two-wheeler at all. He patented guns and industrial tools, but not the machine that mattered most. And that single missing piece of paper is a large part of why history was later handed an excuse to forget him. No patent, no filing, no clean official date to point at. Just a machine, a handbill, and a few thousand witnesses. So the honest version is already very different from the myth. The first motorcycle was not one machine in Germany in 1885. It was 2 steam machines, one American and one French, both built at the end of the 1860s, either of which beats Daimler by nearly 2 decades. And of the two, the American one is the one that would end in blood, because Roper never let the idea go. For the rest of his life, he kept refining it, and by the middle of the 1890s, now in his early 70s, he built a new one. This time he started with a modern safety bicycle, a Pope Columbia, the chain-driven 2 equal wheels design that finally looked like a bicycle anyone would recognize on the street. He hung a single-cylinder steam engine on it, fed by a coal-fired boiler that ran at roughly 150 pounds of pressure, and the finished machine weighed around 150 pounds, with fuel and water aboard. It would run about 7 miles on a load of coal, and Roper, at 72 years old, used to ride it the 7 miles from his house in Roxbury down to the Boston waterfront and back, for the simple pleasure of it. He said it would beat 40 miles an hour. In the spring of 1896, he went to prove it. On the 1st of June, Roper took the machine to the Charles River bicycle track in Cambridge, a banked wooden speedway near the Harvard Bridge, where the fastest cyclists in the region came to train. The plan was simple, and for a man in his 70s, quietly insane. Roper would ride his steam machine as a pacer, running just ahead of the bicycle racers so they could tuck in behind him, draft off the hole he punched in the air, and reach speeds they could never touch alone. So there he was, an old man on a steam engine, pacing professional racers around a wooden bowl, among them a well-known local rider named Nat Butler, and the racers could not keep up with him. He opened it up. Witnesses timed him at a flying mile in 2 minutes and 1.5 seconds. Do the arithmetic, and that is right around 40 miles an hour, on 1896 tyres, on a wooden track, on a coal boiler, ridden by a man in his 70s. And then, near the very top of that speed, the machine began to wobble. It weaved, it went out from under him, and Sylvester Roper was thrown hard onto the boards with a wound to his head. They carried him off the track. He was already gone. His son Charles was there that afternoon, and it was Charles who later wheeled the silent machine home. What actually killed him is the one question no one has ever fully closed. The autopsy recorded heart failure. He was 72, riding at the absolute ragged edge of what the machine could do, and his heart may simply have stopped and dropped him. But there is a darker reading buried in the record. The account in the Boston Globe noted that Roper appeared to have shut off the steam before he fell, which means that in his last conscious seconds he knew something had gone wrong and reached for the controls. Heart first, then the crash. Or the crash first, then the heart. 130 years later, it is still an open argument, but the outcome is not an argument. Sylvester Roper died on a self-propelled two-wheeler, at full speed, on a racetrack, in front of a crowd that had come specifically to see how fast the thing could go. He is, by most accounts, the first person in recorded history to be killed riding a motorcycle. The man who built the first one was also the first to die on one, and he did it 30 years before the word motorcycle was even in common use. So here is what the truth actually costs the tidy version of events. The American motorcycle did not begin in Milwaukee in 1903, and the motorcycle itself did not begin in Germany in 1885. It began on steam in a Boston machine shop in the 1860s with a twist-grip throttle and a coal fire, built by a gunsmith who then rode his own invention to his death. Every single piece of that is documented. The surviving machine sits in the Smithsonian. The engravings exist. The handbill exists. The newspaper account of his death exists. And when the 1896 machine, the one he died on, finally came up for public auction in 2012, it carried an estimate of around $425,000. A coal boiler bolted to a bicycle, valued like a house because there is exactly one of it on Earth and the man who built it never rode it home. It is not a theory and it is not a stretch. It is simply a true story that did not happen to fit the dictionary. Now, to be fair, and this matters because a debunk that cheats is worse than the myth it is attacking, the Daimler machine does keep one honest title. The Reitwagen of 1885 was the first motorcycle powered by an internal combustion engine. It was the first to run on gasoline, and it was the first on the branch that everything modern actually grew from. If a motorcycle is defined strictly by its engine, then Daimler really is the answer, and that distinction deserves to stand. But look closely at what that means. The first motorcycle and the first gasoline motorcycle are two completely different claims, and somewhere along the way the history books quietly swapped one for the other and hoped nobody would check the dates. Roper was first, Daimler was first on the fuel that won. Those are not the same sentence, and the difference is a man's entire legacy. And the strangest part of all of this is that there is no villain in it. Nobody sat down and decided to erase Sylvester Roper. The error grew honestly the way most historical errors do. Steam as a way to drive two wheels really was a dead end. It was heavy, it was hot, it needed a live fire, a boiler, and a tank of water. And the moment a light gasoline engine existed, steam on a motorcycle was finished. So the thousands of machines that came afterward all descended from Daimler's line, and when people later traced the family tree backward, they naturally followed the branch that had children and ignored the branch that stopped. Roper's steam machine had no descendants. It had only a beginning and an end, and both of them were his. Even Daimler did not think he had built a motorcycle. He and Maybach built the Reitwagen as a test bed, a rolling stand to try out an engine, and by 1886 they had already abandoned 2 wheels for 4. The machine the world now calls the first motorcycle was, to the man who actually made it, a piece of scaffolding he threw away. And the machine that truly was first, the world threw away too, and one word, internal combustion, kept the door shut on it for 100 years. So here is the question for everyone watching who loves this stuff. Before today, who did you think built the first motorcycle? Was it Daimler in the back of your head the way it was in mine? Or did you already know about the old man on the steam machine? And if you have ever stood in the Smithsonian and seen that little iron velocipede behind the glass, tell us in the comments what it looked like in person. We read all of them. Because look again at that machine behind the glass. 2 tall wooden wheels, an iron frame, a furnace and a saddle full of water. For more than a century it has been filed as a curiosity, a dead end, a footnote to the real story that supposedly begins in Germany. It is not a footnote. It is the first page, and it got there first by riding on the one thing everyone later agreed was a mistake. And here is the last twist, the one that turns the dead end into a punchline. Steam is not finished. Right now, in a shed in North Yorkshire, a man named Graham Sykes has spent the last several years building a steam-powered drag bike he calls Force of Nature. It is the fastest accelerating steam motorcycle ever made, and over a quarter mile it has run in the low 5 seconds, a time that puts it second among every motorcycle on Earth, beaten only by a rocket bike burning hydrogen peroxide. A Frenchman named Eric Thibault who once ran the quarter in 4 9/10 seconds at more than 290 miles an hour. And Sykes is not the only believer. Back in 2014, an American named Bill Barnes pushed a wheel-driven steam motorcycle past 80 miles an hour, for no reason at all except to prove the old dead end still had a pulse. 150 years after Sylvester Roper strapped a boiler to a bicycle and got called a dead end, a steam two-wheeler is once again one of the fastest launching machines on the planet. The branch that supposedly had no future keeps clawing its way back. Roper never got to see any of that. He got a wound to the head on a wooden track, and a single word that wrote him out of the history he started. But the machine is still here behind the glass, older than the one in the books. The dead end that arrived first. Next time we go from the first motorcycle, the one that ran on fire and water, to the strangest thing an army ever did to the friendliest machine on Earth. The afternoon a nation took an ordinary motor scooter, bolted a 75mm anti-tank cannon straight through its frame, and pushed it out of an airplane under a parachute. Until the next machine.